I am Kayla, 32 years old and exactly 8 months pregnant with my late husband's child. My biological family always mistook my quiet risk assessment background for compliance. Just a few moments ago, my sister Brittany laughed as she threw my leather bag into a muddy ditch, leaving me stranded in the freezing gray fog of the Appalachian Mountains. Go for a walk and relax. It'll be good exercise. Her voice faded into the biting wind as my father Gregory hit the gas, speeding off in their black Range Rover down the remote logging road. They thought abandoning me would secure Caleb's $5 million life insurance payout. They had absolutely no idea that I have been wearing an IRS wire for 6 months. They just triggered the exact felony needed to completely destroy their $90 million empire. The taillights of my parents' luxury SUV bled into the thick gray fog of the Appalachian Trail, leaving me with nothing but the low rumble of the wind through the pines. The cold here is an absolute calculation. In late autumn, the freezing moisture hangs heavy in the air, turning every single breath into a thick cloud of white vapor. I felt the freeze creeping steadily through the thick soles of my shoes, a sharp, continuous drop in temperature. My fingers were already going completely numb. I instinctively pulled my heavy woolen cardigan tightly over my swollen belly, shielding the precious 8-month-old life inside me. Any normal daughter would have collapsed onto the jagged gravel shoulder and sobbed uncontrollably. Any normal woman would have panicked, paralyzed by the raw cruelty of a mother and father driving off into the dark. But my anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a single shred of regret or terror, but there was only absolute clarity. This wasn't an emotional breakdown, it was a balance sheet. For years, I was the silent investor in their version of family, footing the bill while they systematically overdrafted my compassion. They mistook my patient silence for compliance, completely unaware that it was the strategic camouflage of a predator. When I was 12 years old, Gregory looked at me across a crowded dining table and told me I was a liability, not an investment. He said my quiet nature made me completely useless, while Brittany was the golden child born to run their legacy. Back then, as a child, I believed him. I spent an entire childhood wearing the invisible chains of the family scapegoat. But when my husband Caleb died 6 months ago, my processing altered completely. My paralyzing grief turned into a laser-focused risk audit of their entire fraudulent operation. Our relationship had merely been a toxic subscription plan, and I was about to cancel it permanently. I kept a steady pace, walking down the deserted logging road for exactly 10 minutes. I needed to maintain the charade, just in case Gregory checked his rearview mirror one final time. Once the logging road curved sharply, providing complete structural isolation behind a dense wall of evergreens, I stopped. I leaned against the rough bark of a massive pine tree, letting the sudden rush of adrenaline stabilize my breath. Leaning over at 8 months pregnant is a precise execution, but I managed it without a single tear. Yesterday, Melissa had openly mocked these bulky orthopedic sneakers, calling them a tragic fashion choice. She was entirely ignorant of their actual utility. Pregnancy swelling was simply the perfect excuse for the oversized footwear. I unlaced my left shoe, ignoring the sharp bite of mountain air against my skin. Peeling back the foam insole, I exposed the hidden compartment in the heavy rubber sole. Nestled securely inside was a compact, heavy-duty satellite phone. I pressed the power button, watching the screen instantly illuminate against the dim forest. The connection locked onto the overhead canopy within seconds. I didn't need to scroll through contacts or dial an unsecured cellular line. I simply held down the single emergency speed dial key, waiting for the asset collapse to begin. The satellite phone rang exactly once before a gruff, familiar voice cut through the mountain air. "Agent Vance here. Are you secure, Kayla?" I didn't let my voice shake for a second. "I am at mile marker 14 on the old logging route, just past the ridge," I replied. "They left me exactly where we anticipated." He told me the encryption was completely solid and that his dashboard maps already locked on to my global positioning coordinates. He asked if I was unharmed and how the baby was doing. "We are both fine, Agent Vance," I assured him. "Just a little cold." "Did the wire pick up everything clearly?" "Loud and clear," he confirmed over the static. "We have the entire audio feed of Gregory demanding the life insurance transfer, Melissa weaponizing your husband's death, and the physical threat of abandonment." It is a textbook extortion and felony endangerment charge. The confirmation from Agent Vance triggered a vivid memory of 20 minutes ago back inside the boiling, suffocating leather cabin of that Range Rover. The temperature inside had felt like an absolute war zone. My father, Gregory, had gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned paper white, his face contorted into an ugly, purple mask of pure rage. He didn't ask for my assistance. He demanded it with the unyielding authority of a man who believed his bloodline was a permanent license to exploit. "We are facing a temporary liquidity freeze, Kayla," he had declared, glaring through the rearview mirror. "The fund needs an immediate cash injection to bridge a few delayed construction loans. You are going to sign over Caleb's $5 million life insurance payout as collateral right now." A temporary liquidity freeze. That was his sanitized corporate term for a collapsing $90 million Ponzi scheme. I looked him dead in the eyes and refused, keeping my voice perfectly flat, resting my hands protectively over my stomach. "That money is for my child," I had stated evenly. "It is the only thing Caleb left us to ensure our security. I am not risking it on your muddled venture capital fund." The word no was never in my family's vocabulary, especially not when it came from the designated scapegoat. Gregory slammed his fist against the dashboard, rattling the expensive fixtures. "It is not a risk," he roared. "It is a family obligation. We put a roof over your head for 18 years, and this is the gratitude you show." This was the exact moment my mother, Melissa, deployed the cruel normalization trap. She twisted around in the passenger seat, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the digital glare of the dashboard, her face twisted into an ugly, familiar sneer. "You have always been so utterly selfish, Kayla," she spat, her voice dripping with a practiced venom that had been normalized in our household for decades. "Look at you playing the tragic, grieving widow just to avoid your responsibilities to this family legacy." Caleb was an emergency medical rescue pilot. He understood real sacrifice. He would be disgusted to see you hoarding millions while your own flesh and blood faces total financial ruin. The sheer psychological violence of her invoking my dead husband's name made my blood run cold, but I refused to grant them a single ounce of narcissistic supply. In their pathologically twisted world, stealing an orphan's security was completely justified if it maintained their country club image. They viewed their children strictly as transactional assets to be mined for vanity, an auxiliary financial resource to be liquidated when their facade cracked. When I still refused to sign their fraudulent guarantor papers, Gregory slammed on the brakes in the middle of nowhere. "Sign the papers or walk 15 miles back to the highway in the freezing dark." I chose reality. I stepped out into the mist, locking the trap behind me. Inside the suffocating heat of the SUV, the corporate hierarchy of my biological family was on full display. Brittany let out a long, theatrical sigh from the seat next to me, adjusting her expensive cashmere throw with practiced entitlement. "Honestly, Kayla, you are being so incredibly dramatic," she whined, her voice carrying that sharp condescension I had been forced to audit my entire adult life. "Logan and I put our entire existence into managing this venture fund. We are making massive sacrifices for the family legacy while you just get to sit on a mountain of cash and do zero heavy lifting for the brand." I didn't answer her. Instead, I turned my analytical focus toward her husband, Logan. He was an educated financial professional with a pristine corporate background. My parents had systematically paraded Logan through elite boardrooms to secure minority-owned business grants and favorable commercial terms, leveraging his identity as a flawless operational shield. But behind closed doors, Gregory and Melissa treated him like a glorified fall guy. They elevated his lifestyle, handing him tailored suits and a country club membership, but the cost of his subscription to their world was absolute compliance. They made him the chief financial officer on paper, ensuring his legal signature was stamped on every single fabricated tax return and ghost limited liability company they used to shuffle stolen investor capital. Logan knew the entire operation was a decaying house of cards. He sat there in the back seat, his eyes glued to the floor mats, his hands rubbing together in a frantic, anxious motion as the mountain fog thickened outside. He was terrified of the legal liabilities, but his utter cowardice kept him completely silent. He liked the luxury money just as much as they did, choosing to accumulate a bad debt of integrity he could never hope to repay. I am not signing the transfer authorization, Brittany, I stated, my tone perfectly level, completely devoid of emotional compromise, and I am not having this conversation again. That short sentence caused Gregory to completely lose his remaining sanity. He violently swerved the heavy Range Rover onto the gravel shoulder of the dirt logging road, slamming on the brakes so hard the seatbelt dug sharply into my collarbone. Dust plumed outside the windows as the engine idled aggressively in the dim twilight. He turned around in his seat, his face an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated rage, pointing a trembling, thick finger directly at my face. You listen to me, you ungrateful little brat, he hissed, the veins in his neck bulging against his stiff collar. I have the transfer documents right here in the glove compartment. You either sign them right now, or you can get out of my car and walk 15 miles back to the highway in the freezing dark. Let us see how long your stubbornness lasts when you are shivering in the deep forest wilderness. They fully expected me to break. They expected me to burst into tears, apologize for my defiance, and sign away my child's financial security just to stay inside the heated cabin. Instead, I looked my father dead in his eyes, unbuckled my seatbelt, and pulled the door handle. The icy mountain air rushed into the vehicle as I stepped out onto the damp stones, slamming the heavy doors shut behind me, actively forcing them to execute their own legal destruction. I pulled my gaze back to the present moment as the heavy mountain silence settled around me. I lowered the satellite phone, the audio trap officially sprung, and the legal trap doors locked forever behind them. Right on schedule, a sleek, black, unmarked SUV emerged from the dense gray fog, its heavy tires crunching over the frozen dirt pass right next to me. The passenger door swung open with a solid metallic thud, and I stepped inside the heated cabin, letting the sudden rush of warm air regulate my skin temperature. Agent Vance didn't waste a single moment on empty pleasantries. He handed me a large thermos of hot tea, a thick woolen blanket, and a secure, government-issued tablet. I balanced the tablet on my knees as he navigated the heavy vehicle back toward the main highway, my fingers already flying across the encrypted system. I dived straight into the technical maps of their shell organizations, untangling the sprawling, chaotic web of deceit they believed was flawless. To a senior tech risk auditor, these spreadsheets read like a clear map of criminal intent. I cross-referenced the fraudulent wire transfers with the unredacted ledgers bearing Logan's signature, tracing how they funneled innocent investors' funds through a network of ghost limited liability companies registered in Delaware to maintain their opulent country club lifestyle. The total fraudulent exposure was an undeniable $90 million. But this forensic execution carried a deeper, lethal twist that rooted directly into my late husband's legacy. Caleb hadn't died by mere random chance during his final emergency medical rescue flight. Weeks before he died, Caleb had accidentally discovered that Gregory was covertly using his emergency rescue pilot credentials and flight codes to launder millions of dollars of illicit capital through hidden offshore crypto wallets. Caleb knew they were running a criminal operation, and he left behind an encrypted hard drive hidden beneath our bedroom floorboards, documenting their entire multi-million-dollar fraud trail. He died protecting that truth. I wasn't just auditing a corporate collapse on this mountain road. I was completing my dead husband's investigation, turning my raw grief into a weapon of cold, systematic retribution. I opened the final document on the screen, picked up the digital stylus, and signed my name on the legal line, executing an immediate federal whistleblower affidavit to completely dissolve their entire assets under the strict rules of fraudulent conveyance. The trap is set, I told Vance, handing the tablet back. The U.S. attorney has been pre-staged at the Capitol Rotunda for hours, waiting for this exact digital milestone. Execute the warrants and cue the live broadcast. Exactly 15 miles away, completely insulated from the sub-freezing mountain wind, my biological family was busy celebrating their perceived victory. The interior of their $7.5 million luxury timber lodge was a masterclass in excessive wealth purchased with stolen investor funds. The sharp pop of a champagne cork echoed through the vaulted ceiling, followed by the smug clinking of crystal flutes. Gregory poured the expensive vintage with a wide grin, completely arrogant in the belief that I was currently weeping on a freezing mountain stump. Brittany sprawled across the plush velvet sofa, scrolling mindlessly through social media, mocking how pathetic it was to be related to me. Every Sunday afternoon, Gregory observed his sacred ritual of dominance. He settled into his custom leather chair, remote in hand, and turned on the massive 90-inch flat-screen television mounted above the fireplace to watch the pregame show. But just as the sports anchors began running through the statistics, the connection froze. The crowd noise cut out completely, replaced by a sharp emergency broadcast tone before the screen transitioned to a live feed from the state capitol building. The U.S. attorney stepped up to the wooden podium, her expression carved from stone. Today, my office, in a joint operation with the IRS Financial Crimes Division, is announcing the immediate shutdown and asset seizure of one of the largest real estate fraud rings in history, she announced, her voice echoing through the cabin's surround sound with unyielding authority. For over 5 years, a single organization has operated an elaborate $90 million Ponzi scheme, laundering stolen funds through ghost corporations. Today, immediate arrest warrants without bail have been executed for the senior leadership of the firm. Melissa's smile froze, and the champagne glass suddenly looked incredibly heavy in her hand. Gregory fumbled uselessly with the remote, the color rapidly draining from his face. Brittany let out a sharp gasp, muttering that this couldn't be about them. But the camera operator on screen slowly panned to the right, tightening focus on the primary whistleblower. Standing tall in the rotunda, flanked by armed federal agents, was me. Dressed impeccably in a tailored navy blue maternity blazer, my expression was a mask of absolute, serene calm. The organization in question, I stated clearly, my eyes boring directly through the lens, is Apex Pinnacle Holdings, operating under the public front of Blue Ridge Luxury Properties. Methodically, ruthlessly, I began listing every single one of their ghost limited liability companies on statewide television, dismantling their entire $90 million empire brick by brick. Gregory's expensive champagne glass slipped from his limp fingers, hitting the floorboards with a violent, sharp crash that sent crystal shards flying across the rug. Across the room, Logan let out a hollow, terrified sob, sliding down the wall until his knees hit the floor, realizing his signature had just sealed his 20-year federal prison sentence. The sirens were completely silent, but the strobing red and blue lights turned the Appalachian pine forest into a blinding neon nightmare. The heavy crunch of gravel echoed through the valley as an absolute armada of matte black unmarked federal vehicles and state trooper cruisers swarmed the property, completely sealing off the only exit. The fortress of wealth they had built on a foundation of stolen money was now an inescapable prison. The heavy oak front door of the timber lodge threw open, and Logan was the first to scramble out, his hands raised high, tears and sweat slicking his face. He offered zero resistance, as 2 special agents yanked his arms behind his back, forcing him against the log siding. The cold steel handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists, a sharp metallic punctuation mark on his 5 years of corporate complicity. He sobbed uncontrollably, broken by the primal fear of losing his future. Gregory and Melissa emerged neck stripped of their country club elegance, guided roughly into the back seats of separate federal cruisers. Brittany was the last one out, her eyes wild as they locked onto me stepping down from the lead command vehicle. The sight of me looking entirely unbothered, standing on the right side of the law, completely shattered whatever fragile sanity she had left. "You jealous, psychotic freak! You ruined everything!" she shrieked, lunging off the porch with her hands curled into claws, aiming directly for my face. She didn't even make it 3 steps. 2 female agents intercepted her with brutal efficiency, slamming her face first onto the wet, muddy hood of a cruiser. Gregory physically recoiled against his restraints inside the adjacent cruiser, screaming through the cracked window pane, "You think you have won, Kayla? This entire estate is locked away in an airtight, irrevocable trust. The federal government cannot pierce it, and you cannot lay a single finger on it." I didn't flinch. I walked slowly toward the vehicle, opening my briefcase to pull out a thick manila folder bearing the official raised seal of the United States Department of the Treasury. "An irrevocable trust only protects legitimate assets," Gregory, I said, my voice carrying a lethal clinical precision. Because the initial seed money was direct proceeds of a wire fraud enterprise, the judge signed the sealed seizure warrants 21 days ago, but they were kept strictly confidential until 21 minutes ago, the exact moment you executed that extortion on a live federal wire. Your domestic accounts, your offshore assets in the Cayman Islands, and your credit lines are being frozen as we speak. Your personal retirement funds, Melissa's trust accounts, and the corporate operating accounts have all been locked down under federal asset forfeiture laws. You literally have nothing left. That safety net you just bragged about does not exist anymore. It has been entirely dissolved. The empire you built on the backs of stolen money and destroyed lives has evaporated into thin air in less than an hour. The power you wielded over me, over Logan, over innocent investors has been stripped away completely. You are completely and utterly bankrupt. Gregory stared at the notice, his mouth hanging open in absolute disbelief. No, he whispered, looking at the massive lodge. This cabin belongs to a separate holding company in Nevada. You cannot touch this house. I slid the forfeiture order back and poured out a county-issued property deed bearing a gold seal. You forgot one crucial detail while keeping your Ponzi scheme afloat, Gregory. You neglected to pay the property taxes for 3 straight years. The county finalized the tax foreclosure on this luxury retreat, and the ownership deed was officially transferred to an anonymous limited liability company at 9 o'clock this morning. I am the sole proprietor of that company, Gregory. The formal eviction notice is being served right now alongside your arrest warrants. You are not standing on your property anymore. You are standing on mine. Brittany crumpled directly onto the wet, muddy gravel, her expensive cashmere sweater instantly soaking in the freezing grime. The golden child was entirely neutralized. Dragging herself forward on her knees to beg for a room in the guest quarters, promising to clean, promising to disappear if I just kept her out of a cage. I reached into the front pocket of my tailored maternity blazer. She looked up with a sudden, desperate flicker of hope, assuming family loyalty would force my submission. I simply let go of a folded piece of paper, letting it flutter down into the mud by her knees. That is the invoice for the deep cleaning service, I told her, my voice cutting through her sobbing. $1,200. You tracked mud all over my front porch. 6 months later, the sharp crack of the federal judge's wooden gavel echoed through the downtown Asheville federal courtroom, delivering the absolute finality of justice. Gregory received 15 years in a federal penitentiary, effectively a life sentence given his advanced age. Melissa was handed 10 years, her dark roots growing out past the faded dye, exposing the raw, unpolished lines of her systemic cruelty. Brittany, the golden child who believed she was entirely above the law, was sentenced to 7 years in a maximum security federal facility due to her complete lack of cooperation and documented history of hostile outbursts. Logan, who broke down immediately after his arrest and chose to cooperate fully with federal prosecutors, handed over the decryption keys to their offshore ledgers and burner phones. In exchange for his vital testimony, he walked away with 5 years of supervised probation and a permanent lifetime ban from the financial sector, ensuring he could go home to raise his son tonight. I stood perfectly straight in the aisle, my 5-month-old daughter Grace sleeping warmly against my chest, completely untouched by their wreckage. The Timber Lodge is no longer a monument to my parents' greed and hollow vanity. Using the remnants of their dissolved empire, I permanently rebranded the estate as the Caleb Memorial Sanctuary, a fully funded resource center and safe haven specifically designed for victims of familial financial abuse. The luxurious rooms where my sister once threw tantrums are now occupied by brave individuals learning how to rebuild their lives, dissolve fraudulent debt, and reclaim their sacred independence from predatory relatives. We took a glass fortress built entirely on structural lies and turned it into a foundation for absolute truth. My family tried to bury me in the freezing mountain fog, completely blind to the reality that I was a seed. I've come to realize that family isn't about blood. It's about actions of absolute safety, protection, and unconditional respect. You do not owe your abusers a seat at your table just because you happen to share the same genetics. For over 3 decades, I was gaslit into believing that my personal boundaries were an act of rebellion and that my demand for basic human dignity was selfish. But if you find yourself in a similar situation today, sitting in the heavy silence of your own family's exploitation, remember this: your peace is a luxury. They do not have the right to overdraft. Relinquishing a toxic biological bond isn't a sin. Sometimes it is the only way to set yourself free and protect the future of your children. You stop waiting for an apology they are neurologically incapable of giving, and you start building a beautiful, luminous life that their cruelty cannot touch. If you have ever had to cut off toxic biological ties to save your own soul, please share your story in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and remember your peace is always worth protecting.